The CEO lost all hope when his empire collapsed, but everyone was shocked when the Maid's son saved it. The room was silent, but not the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the heavy, suffocating kind, the kind that pressed down on everyone's chest as if the air itself had turned against them. The CEO of one of the biggest companies in the city stood frozen in front of a wall of blank computer screens. Red error codes flashed like fire alarms, warnings that the entire system had collapsed. Years of work, billions of dollars, and the reputation of an empire, gone in a single heartbeat. He had seen problems before, of course. Leaders always do. But this was different. This wasn't a problem you could smooth over with a speech or fix with a quick phone call. This was the kind of failure that could destroy everything. Shareholders demanding answers, employees on the verge of losing their jobs, the press waiting for a headline that would bury him forever. For the first time in his long, confident career, he felt something he had never allowed himself to feel: hopelessness. Around him, chaos swirled. Experts tapped furiously at keyboards, their faces pale with panic. IT managers barked orders, but the truth was clear. They were lost. Every attempt only made the system worse. Files disappeared. Security walls broke down. It was as if the entire heartbeat of the company had flatlined and no one had the power to revive it. And then, in the corner of the room, almost invisible among the frantic suits and expensive ties, stood a figure no one noticed. A quiet young man, dressed in simple clothes, clutching a worn backpack. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't an employee, wasn't a manager, wasn't even part of the team. To most, he was just the Maid's son, the kid who came by sometimes when his mother stayed late cleaning offices no one cared to thank her for. But what no one knew, not the CEO, not the experts, not even his own mother, was that this unassuming young man carried a gift, a knowledge so sharp and powerful that it could change everything. The question was, would anyone give him the chance? Because in that moment, when all hope was gone, the last person they ever expected might be the only one who could save them. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the headquarters, casting a golden glow on the polished marble floors. This was no ordinary office. It was a fortress of glass and steel, the crown jewel of a billion-dollar empire. Every corner spoke of wealth, shimmering chandeliers, towering digital screens, and the constant hum of machines that powered one of the largest corporations in the country. At the top of it all stood Jonathan Pierce, the CEO. To most people, he was untouchable. Sharp suits, powerful speeches, and the kind of confidence that filled a room before he even stepped inside. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a symbol of success. For years, people admired him, envied him, even feared him. His company ran like a well-oiled machine, and so did his life. Or so it seemed. But beneath the surface, Jonathan was restless. He had built an empire that relied on technology more than anything else. Systems that tracked billions in assets, monitored clients, and processed information faster than the blink of an eye. It was his pride and his greatest weakness. Because deep down he knew one thing. If that system ever failed, everything he had worked for would collapse with it. Still, he pushed the thought away. Failure wasn't part of his vocabulary. Every morning he arrived at the office greeted by nods and nervous smiles. Assistants scrambled to keep up with him. Department heads rehearsed their updates before stepping into his office. To everyone around him, he was the man who had it all under control. But not everyone in that building wore fine suits or carried briefcases. After the board members had gone home and the lights dimmed, another group quietly took over, the cleaning staff. Among them was Marjorie, a middle-aged black woman who had worked there for over a decade. She moved through the offices at night with quiet determination, polishing the same floors that executives walked over without noticing her, emptying trash bins filled with secrets no one cared to protect, and wiping down desks where million-dollar deals had been made. To most, she was invisible. But to her son, David, she was everything. David often waited for her in the lobby or helped her carry supplies when her shifts ran late. He was young, sharp-eyed, and curious, always carrying his beat-up old laptop in his backpack. Technology fascinated him. While others dismissed him as the maid's son, he spent hours teaching himself coding, cybersecurity, and system architecture, skills no one realized he had mastered in silence. Jonathan barely knew their names. To him, Marjorie was just another employee who kept the offices spotless. He never stopped to think about her story, her sacrifices, or the son who often sat quietly by the service entrance while his mother worked. Why would he? CEOs didn't notice the invisible. But fate has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it. On that particular morning, as Jonathan strode into the control room, he couldn't have imagined that his world was about to unravel. He had come prepared for another day of reports and numbers, of handshakes and power plays. The executives were already gathered, whispering about stock prices and quarterly goals. Screens glowed with charts and data, humming with the rhythm of order and control. And then, without warning, everything went dark. At first, it seemed like a glitch, just a momentary flicker. But when the screens lit up again, it wasn't numbers and charts staring back at them. It was chaos. Error codes spilled across the monitors, alarms blared, and one by one, every system they relied on began to collapse. In seconds, Jonathan's empire went from flawless precision to total silence. The board members panicked. IT managers rushed in, their fingers flying across keyboards. But the more they tried, the worse it got. Whole databases vanished. Security protocols disintegrated. The company's most guarded information seemed to be slipping through their fingers like water. And somewhere in the building, just a floor away, Marjorie was scrubbing down a conference table, completely unaware that her world, too, was about to collide with Jonathan's in a way no one could have predicted. Because in the shadows of the chaos, her son David was watching. And soon the boy no one paid attention to would step into the light. The alarms didn't stop. Red lights flashed across the control room as if the building itself were panicking. Every screen filled with lines of code no one could understand, error messages stacking on top of each other like a digital avalanche. The company's lifeline, its entire operating system, wasn't just malfunctioning. It was crumbling. Jonathan Pierce, usually so composed and commanding, stood frozen. He barked orders at his IT team, but the fear in his voice betrayed him. "Fix it! Now!" he demanded, but deep down he could see it in their eyes. They were out of their depth. These were supposed to be the brightest minds in the industry, yet they were helpless against whatever had struck. "Sir, it's spreading," one technician muttered, his voice shaking. "The system's being wiped in real time. We're losing everything." Another voice cut in. "Our security's breached. If we don't stop this, confidential data could be exposed. We could be ruined." The weight of those words sank into everyone's chest. Ruined. For Jonathan, that meant headlines that would destroy his reputation, lawsuits that would bury his empire, thousands of employees suddenly jobless. This wasn't just a glitch, it was a disaster. He slammed his fist against the table, but even that did nothing to change the screens staring back at him like silent judges. For the first time in his career, the man who had built an empire out of control and order was watching everything spin beyond his reach. Meanwhile, in the quiet corners of the building, Marjorie continued her work. She didn't know the details of what was happening, but she could feel the shift. The once calm halls were buzzing with hurried footsteps, frantic voices, and tension so thick it seeped through the walls. Her son David, sitting near the lobby with his laptop, noticed too. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at the frantic employees rushing past. Curiosity got the better of him. He wandered toward the commotion, careful not to be noticed. From the doorway, he peeked into the control room. Dozens of men and women in expensive suits surrounded the CEO, their faces pale with dread. But David wasn't watching them. He was watching the screens. To him, the chaos wasn't meaningless. It was a puzzle. The lines of code, the flashing errors, it wasn't random. It was structured, almost like a language only he could understand. His fingers itched for the keyboard. He whispered under his breath, "It's not just crashing. It's being hijacked." Jonathan was too caught up in his panic to notice the boy lingering nearby. He barked again at his team. "We can't afford excuses. We need solutions." But solutions weren't coming. Every attempt only locked them out further. Passwords failed, firewalls collapsed, backups disappeared. It was as though someone had built a digital cage around the system and swallowed the key. A chilling thought crossed Jonathan's mind. What if this is the end? For the first time, he felt powerless. His empire, the pride of his life, was slipping away. And then, almost like fate, a quiet voice spoke from the edge of the room. It wasn't loud, but in the heavy silence, every head turned. "I think I know what's happening." It was David, the boy most of them had never noticed before. He stepped forward hesitantly, clutching his laptop. His simple clothes looked wildly out of place in a room filled with tailored suits and shining shoes, but his eyes held something the others didn't: clarity. Jonathan frowned, barely recognizing him. "Who are you?" Before David could answer, a manager scoffed. "That's the cleaning lady's kid. He shouldn't even be in here." A ripple of dismissive laughter ran through the room, but David didn't flinch. He took another step forward. "You don't have time. This isn't a glitch. It's a targeted attack. Whoever built it, they didn't expect someone who can read it like I can." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He didn't trust him. Why would he? But deep down, he also knew the truth. His team had failed. Every passing second was costing millions, maybe billions. They had no options left. And here was this boy, this outsider, claiming he could help. The room waited, breathless. Would the CEO push him aside? Or would he take the biggest gamble of his life? Because sometimes salvation doesn't come from the people you expect. It comes from the ones you've overlooked. And David was no longer invisible. The room was a battlefield of doubt. Every executive, every technician, every manager stared at the boy standing at the edge of the chaos. His words lingered in the air like a spark waiting to ignite. "I think I can fix it." Silence followed, broken only by the relentless blare of alarms. Jonathan Pierce narrowed his eyes, sizing up David. He saw nothing but a kid in worn sneakers and a second-hand hoodie, holding a scuffed laptop. To trust him now would be madness. But what choice did he have? "Sir, this is absurd," one of the IT heads protested. "He's just a kid. If we let him touch the system, he could make it worse." Jonathan's jaw clenched. The system was already beyond saving. Nothing could make it worse. His empire was falling apart before his eyes, and the so-called experts had failed. Still, the weight of humiliation crushed him. Was this what it had come to? Relying on the maid's son? David didn't back down. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the doubt surrounding him. "You don't have time for pride. Every second you waste, more data is lost. Let me try." The conviction in his tone sent a shiver through the room. Jonathan hesitated, caught between pride and desperation. Then, with a sharp nod, he barked, "Clear a station. Give him access." Gasps echoed. No one expected it. The IT team exchanged looks of disbelief as David slid into the chair. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a moment before they began to fly. The sound of keys clicking filled the room, a rhythm sharp and confident. Lines of code appeared on the screen in rapid bursts. Where the experts had stumbled, David moved like water, flowing through the system with ease. His eyes narrowed, scanning every error, every corrupted pathway. To him, it was almost like music, a broken song that he alone knew how to repair. The technicians crowded behind him, watching in stunned silence. "How is he doing that?" one whispered. "He shouldn't even know these frameworks," another muttered. "We don't teach this outside specialized training." But David wasn't hearing them. His focus was absolute. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, bypassing firewalls, isolating the virus, and building a counter-sequence in real time. It was a battle of wits against an unseen enemy, and David wasn't just holding his ground, he was winning. Jonathan found himself leaning closer, his heart pounding. He had expected failure, humiliation. Instead, he was watching something extraordinary unfold. This boy, the one he had ignored for years, was outclassing his entire team. Minutes felt like hours, every keystroke carrying the weight of millions of dollars. The room held its breath. Then, suddenly, a shift. The red error codes slowed. One by one, the alarms went quiet. Systems began flickering back to life. Databases restored. Firewalls rebuilt. Operations rebooted. "Wait, look!" a technician shouted, pointing at the main monitor. "It's stabilizing!" The impossible was happening. David leaned back for a moment, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes burned with determination. "Almost there," he murmured, diving back in. With a final string of commands, the last error vanished. The screens glowed bright again, numbers and charts returning like heartbeat monitors coming back to life. The company's system was breathing again. The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, and disbelieving laughter filled the air. Some clapped, others simply stared in shock. The IT team, humbled and astonished, could only watch the boy they had dismissed moments ago save the very empire they had failed to protect. Jonathan stood frozen, his throat tight. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave, but it was mixed with something else. Shame. For years he had walked past this boy and his mother without a second thought. Yet in his darkest hour, it was their son who had saved him. Slowly, the CEO's lips parted, but words failed him. David closed his laptop with a soft click and stood. For a moment, the boy looked out of place again, small and quiet in a room full of power. But this time, everyone saw him differently. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was the reason the company still stood. The control room had never felt so alive. The same walls that moments ago echoed with alarms and fear now vibrated with disbelief and relief. Monitors glowed with restored data, systems hummed back into order, and the air that had been thick with dread was replaced with stunned silence broken by nervous laughter. But in the middle of it all, one figure stood apart. David. His worn laptop tucked under his arm, his eyes lowered, his breathing still heavy from the storm he had just navigated. Around him, men and women in polished suits exchanged astonished looks. Some clapped awkwardly. Others whispered his name for the first time as if trying to etch it into their memory. David, the Maid's son. Jonathan Pierce, the CEO who had built an empire on confidence and control, felt something he hadn't in years. Humility. He walked toward David slowly, his mind replaying every moment of dismissal. Every time he had brushed past Marjorie in the halls without so much as a thank you, every time the boy had sat quietly in the lobby, invisible. And now, here he was, no longer invisible, but the savior of the very empire Jonathan had nearly lost. "You," Jonathan's voice cracked before he steadied it, "you saved us!" David looked up, his expression calm but resolute. He didn't need applause. He didn't need praise. He simply nodded. "I just did what I knew how to do." The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any speech Jonathan had ever given. This wasn't arrogance or performance. It was truth. Behind them, the executives whispered louder now. "How did he know that? He's just a kid. He shouldn't have been able to fix what our best minds couldn't." But the truth was undeniable. The boy they had ignored, overlooked, even dismissed as irrelevant, had done what none of them could. Jonathan turned to the others. His voice, once sharp and commanding, was quieter now. "Remember his name. Without him, none of you would have jobs tomorrow." The weight of his words fell heavy. For once, the CEO wasn't the hero of his own story. Someone else had taken that role. Later that evening, when the building began to calm and people trickled out, Jonathan found himself in an unfamiliar place, the break room, where Marjorie was gathering her things. She looked up, startled to see him. For years, she had been invisible to him too, just another member of the staff, someone who moved silently through the background of his empire. But now he saw her clearly, not as the maid, not as a shadow, but as the mother of the boy who had just saved his world. "Marjorie," he said softly. It felt strange on his tongue, calling her by name, but it was the first step toward acknowledgement. She straightened, unsure of what was coming. "Yes, sir?" Jonathan hesitated, then exhaled. "Your son is extraordinary. Today, I owe everything to him and to you." Her eyes softened with a quiet pride that needed no words. For years, she had carried the weight of invisibility. But she had always known her son was special. And now, the world finally knew too. David entered the room, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He glanced between his mother and the CEO. The tension was thick, but different now, not born of hierarchy, but of respect. Jonathan stepped forward. "David, I want to offer you something. A place here. Training, resources, mentorship. You have a gift, and the world needs to see it. No, we need to see it." The boy's eyes flickered with surprise. Opportunity had never been handed to him before. Everything he knew, he had fought for in silence without recognition. Now, for the first time, someone powerful was acknowledging his worth. But David's answer came with quiet strength. "I'll think about it. But I didn't do this for you. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The honesty in his voice left Jonathan speechless. This wasn't about money, power, or recognition for David. It was about integrity, something that couldn't be bought or taught. That night, as Jonathan left the building, the city skyline stretched before him. He had nearly lost everything, and yet, what haunted him most wasn't the fear of collapse. It was the realization of how blind he had been. How many more Davids had he walked past in his lifetime? How many others had been invisible, their brilliance ignored because of where they came from or what they looked like? The incident became a quiet turning point, not just for Jonathan, but for everyone who witnessed it. The story of the maid's son spread through the company like wildfire. Executives whispered it in boardrooms. Employees shared it in hushed conversations. And for the first time, the walls of power trembled, not from failure, but from recognition that genius and value do not wear a suit, nor do they come stamped with privilege. For Marjorie and David, life didn't suddenly become perfect, but something had shifted. They were no longer invisible, and sometimes being seen is the first step toward change. And for the audience, the takeaway was clear. Brilliance knows no status. Dignity has no color. Potential has no class. The question that remained, however, was haunting. How many more voices, how many more talents are still being silenced because no one chooses to look their way? Because the truth is, it should not take a crisis for the world to see someone's worth.